Welcome back to Automate Office Work, the show where we take the chaos of modern office life and replace it with calm, elegant systems. I'm your host, Justin, and if you're new here, the mission is simple. We take real world business problems and we solve them with automation. No computer science degree required. Today's episode is one I've been wanting to record for a long time. We're talking about something that separates the amateurs from the professionals, something that determines whether the thing you built is a gift or a burden. We're talking about configuration. And to explain why it matters so much, I want to start with a story. There once was a man named Dave. Dave was a sharp guy. He worked in operations at a mid-sized marketing agency. He had built what he called the most beautiful approval workflow of his career. When any project budget exceeded $500, the system would automatically send an email to the director of marketing, a woman named Sarah. It would pull the project details, format them neatly, and ping Sarah asking for sign off. No more chasing people down the hallway. No more missed approvals. It worked perfectly. Dave was proud of that system, and he had every right to be. Until Tuesday. On Tuesday, Sarah got promoted. Congratulations, Sarah! She moved up to VP level. Great news for her. A new director, Marcus, stepped into the role, and Marcus, being a fiscally prudent person, decided the approval threshold should be lowered from $500 to $300. Two changes. One name, one number, that's it. Dave spent his entire Tuesday afternoon, 4 hours, digging through the automation he'd built months earlier, hunting for every place he had typed sarah.jones@company.com and every place he had typed 500 because he had hard coded those values. They were baked into the logic like raisins in bread. You can't just pull them out. And here's the thing that really stings. Dave's automation was technically excellent. The logic was solid. The formatting was beautiful. But because he had hard coded those two values, the whole thing became his personal maintenance burden the moment anything changed. Dave didn't build a solution. He built a prison. And he was the only person with the keys. That is what today's episode is about. We're going to talk about how to build automations that other people, your managers, your colleagues, your clients, can update themselves without emailing you, without calling you, without even knowing what code is. We're going to cover four major pillars: organizational structure, style and branding, interface language, and then we'll go deep into the technical blueprint for making all of it real. By the end of this episode, you will never hard code a value again. Let's get into it. All right, level one, the foundation. And this one is deceptively simple, but it's the most common place where automations go wrong. Let's talk about people. Every automation at some point touches a human being. It sends an email to someone. It routes a request to a team. It assigns a task to a person. And the moment you type a specific person's name or email address into your code, you have created a dependency on that individual continuing to exist in that role. Businesses are like Lego sets. They are constantly being pulled apart and rebuilt. People get promoted, they leave, they move between departments. Entire divisions merge or get renamed. A company that had 3 regional offices last year might have 5 this year. The head of finance at the start of the year might be on parental leave by Q3 and replaced by someone acting in the role. If your automation assumes that John in accounting is always John in accounting, then your automation is already aging. It's already fragile. So what do we do instead? We map roles, not people. Here's a concrete example. Let's say you're building an expense approval system for a company with offices in 5 countries. Each country has a regional finance manager. Approvals above a certain amount need to go to that manager. Your first instinct might be to build a lookup like this. If country is Germany, email Klaus. If country is Brazil, email Fernanda. Don't do that. Because the moment Klaus moves to a different role, your German office is sending approvals into a black hole. Instead, build a people map. It's a simple table. Could be a spreadsheet, a database, a settings page, with columns for region, role, and current person. maybe a fourth column for their email, and a fifth for a backup contact. Your automation doesn't ask who is the finance manager in Germany. It asks the table. The table answers, and the table can be updated by a non-technical admin in about 30 seconds. This sounds basic. It is basic. And yet it's the thing I see missing in probably 60% of the automations people share with me. Now, let's take this to a level deeper, because there are actually three sub-problems inside this organizational structure challenge. The first is people and roles, which we just covered. The second is thresholds and rules. Going back to Dave's situation, it wasn't just Sarah's email that was hard-coded. It was the $500 threshold. Rules like that change constantly. Tax rates change, approval limits change, discount caps change, credit limits change. If those numbers live in your code, every change requires a developer. Every change creates risk of error. Every change takes time. The fix is exactly the same as with people. Externalize the value. Create a settings file or a configuration table where those numbers live. Give someone who isn't you the ability to update them. The third subproblem is hierarchy and escalation. Many workflows aren't just send to one person. They're send to this person, and if they haven't responded in 48 hours, escalate to their manager. That escalation path is organizational structure, and it changes when org charts change. The professional solution is to build a simple organizational hierarchy into your configuration. Each person has a manager. Each manager has a manager. Your automation can walk up that tree when it needs to escalate without you ever having to hardwire the path. Let me give you the golden rule for this entire section. Build it so that when the head of sales changes, the sales manager can log into a settings page, swap the name, hit save, and walk away. You shouldn't even receive a notification that it happened. That's the goal. When your automation is invisible to you because it runs itself, that's when you know you've built it right. A quick side note here on timing. When you first build an automation, you're often doing it quickly, under deadline pressure, and for a specific immediate need. The temptation is to just put the values directly in the code for now and fix it later. I want you to fight that temptation. For now has a way of becoming forever. The technical debt of hard-coded values compounds. Build the configuration layer from day one. It takes an extra 30 minutes up front, and it saves hours of headaches down the road. Okay, level 2. This is one of my favorites to talk about because it touches on human psychology just as much as it touches on technology. Let's talk about style. I know, when I say style, some of you are rolling your eyes. You built a serious automation. You're doing real work. Who cares what color the button is? Stick with me, because this matters more than you think. There's a concept in organizational psychology and software development called the bike shedding effect, sometimes called Parkinson's law of triviality. The idea was originally proposed by C. Northcote Parkinson back in 1957, and it goes like this. Imagine a committee is reviewing two proposals. The first is a complex technical proposal for a nuclear power plant. The second is a simple proposal for a bike shed to be built next to the plant. On the nuclear plant, which is enormously complex, full of engineering decisions that require deep expertise, the committee spends very little time. Why? Because most members of the committee don't understand it well enough to have an opinion. It gets approved quickly. On the bike shed, which is simple enough that everyone has an opinion, the committee spends hours. What color should it be painted? Should it be wood or metal? Where exactly should it face? Should there be a lock? This is bike shedding. People gravitate toward discussing things they can understand, even when those things are less important than the complex stuff they can't. And here's the connection to your automations. When you show stakeholders what you've built, they're not going to comment on your database schema or your API call structure. They probably can't, but they absolutely will comment on the button color, on the font, on whether the company logo is in the right place, on whether the interface feels right. I used to find this frustrating. I've watched developers spend hours building an elegant data processing pipeline, only to have the first feedback from management be, can we change the header from navy blue to royal blue? The navy blue feels a bit cold. But I've come around because I've realized that this feedback, annoying as it is, represents something important: ownership. When someone cares about the color of the button, it means they care about the tool. It means they've looked at it carefully enough to have a preference. That's actually a sign of engagement. And more practically, if you give people control over the surface level appearance of a tool, two things happen. First, they feel a sense of ownership over it, which means they're more likely to actually use it. And second, they stop coming to you every time the brand guidelines change. So the professional move is embrace it. Give them the crayons. Build a style configuration. What does that actually include? Let's break it down. First, primary and secondary colors. Every company has a brand palette. Instead of picking colors yourself, create a settings panel where someone can enter a color code. Primary color, secondary color, accent color, background, text, done. If the company rebrands next year, and they might, someone updates 6 colors, and your entire tool reflects the new brand instantly. Second, logo. Your tool should have a place for a company logo. Don't embed a logo file. Create a reference to a logo file stored in a designated folder. When the logo changes, and logos do change, someone replaces the file. Your tool updates automatically. Third, typography. This one people don't think about as much, but fonts are a big part of brand identity. If your company uses a specific font family, let that be configurable. Store the font name as a variable. One change cascades everywhere. Fourth, icons and button labels. Buttons with generic labels like submit or confirm, those labels should be configurable. We'll actually talk more about this in the next section on language, but the same principle applies here. Don't bake words into your code. Fifth, layout preferences. Things like whether a sidebar should be on the left or right, whether a dashboard should show a compact view or an expanded view, whether tables should have zebra stripes. These are small, but they add up to the feeling that the tool was built for this specific team, not dropped in from the outside. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying you need to build a fully custom design system for every automation you create. I'm saying you need to externalize the values so they can be changed without touching the code. There's a big difference between building a beautiful, fully configurable UI and simply putting your color values in a config file instead of in the code directly. Start small. Even just moving your primary color and logo into a settings file is a massive improvement over hard coding them. One more thought on this, and then we'll move on. There's a version of this that goes even further, which is letting users personalize their individual experience. Not just the company-wide branding, but personal preferences, dark mode or light mode, whether they prefer a condensed dashboard or a detailed one, which notifications they want and at what frequency. These user-level preferences live in a user profile, not a company config file. But the principle is the same. Externalize, externalize, externalize. All right, bike shed painted. Let's move to level 3. Level 3. And this one is my absolute favorite because it's the one that surprises people the most when they realize how impactful it is. We're talking about language, interface language, the words on the screen. Let me start with a very simple truth. No matter what you name something, someone will want to call it something else. You label a button submit. Your users want it to say send for approval. You call a record a client. The sales team calls them partners. You say invoice, accounting says bill. You say project, the operations team says engagement. This is not obsessive attention to minor details. Language shapes how people interact with tools. When someone has to translate a word in their head every time they click a button, okay, submit means send to my boss, that's friction. It's tiny friction. but it adds up. And it creates a subtle psychological distance between the user and the tool. The tool feels like it was built for someone else. But the real language challenge goes well beyond terminology preferences. It goes global. If your company has an office in Berlin, your German colleagues should be able to work in German. If there's a team in Sao Paulo, they should be able to work in Portuguese. If you're serving clients in Tokyo, the interface should speak Japanese. I know what some of you are thinking. That sounds incredibly complicated. Translation is a massive project. I can barely keep my automation running without adding a multilingual layer on top of it. Here's the thing. If you build it right from the beginning, internationalization, which is the technical term for building software to support multiple languages, is not as hard as it sounds. The key is to decouple the text from the code. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in practice. Imagine you're building an expense submission form. There's a label that says amount. There's a dropdown that says currency. There's a button that says submit. Instead of writing those words directly into your code, you do this. You create a translation file. It's just a simple text file that maps a key to a word. The key for the amount label might be form_amount. The value in that file is amount. When your interface needs to display the label, it doesn't display the word amount. It looks up the key form_amount and displays whatever that key maps to. You might then expand this from key value pairs to a spreadsheet to hold multiple languages. Column 1 has your keys, like form_amount. The top row has your language codes, like EN for English, DE for German. At the intersection of these is the key value for each language. Form_amount maps to Betrag in German. Form_currency maps to Währung. Form_submit maps to Einreichen. Now, when a user logs in and their profile says preferred language German, the system loads the German translation values. Every label, every button, every tooltip, every error message automatically in German, without you changing a single line of logic. And here's the beautiful part. You don't even have to do the translations yourself. You create the structure, you build the English version, and then you hand a translation spreadsheet to someone who speaks German and say, fill in the DE column. They fill it in, you import it, done. You could even allow the company to add more language columns whenever they want to. Now let me expand on the terminology configuration piece, because this one also has a technical solution that's just as elegant. Instead of a translation file organized by language, you build a terminology file organized by company or department. So a company that calls their customers partners can update one entry in that file. Every place in the interface that used to say client now says partner. The logic doesn't change. The data doesn't change. Only the label changes. This is incredibly powerful in enterprise software where different business units often have radically different vocabularies for the same underlying concepts. Before I move on, let me give you a practical tip that sits right at the intersection of this section and the previous one. When designing interfaces, use universal icons wherever possible. A magnifying glass for search, a floppy disk, yes, everyone still knows what that means, for save, a bell for notifications, a gear for settings. Icons transcend language. If your interface uses a magnifying glass instead of the word search, your German users, your Japanese users, and your English users all instantly understand it. You've eliminated an entire translation entry and you've made the interface cleaner. Icons for universal actions, words, configurable translatable words for everything else. One more thought on this topic, accessibility. When you're building your language and label system, this is also the perfect time to think about accessibility. Some users may be using screen readers, some may have dyslexia and benefit from a different font, some may need higher contrast. These aren't edge cases. These are real people on your team. If your labels, fonts, and colors are all configurable, accessibility accommodations become dramatically easier. It's not about building a completely different tool for different users. It's about building one tool that adapts. All right, we've covered the three levels: organizational structure, style and branding, and interface language. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts. How do you actually build this? The good news: the underlying technical concept is simple, almost embarrassingly simple. The whole thing rests on one idea: separating data from logic. Your logic, the code that actually does things, the if-then statements, the loops, the API calls, that should never contain a specific value that might change. Instead, it should reference a variable. And that variable should be stored somewhere external, somewhere editable, without touching the code. The most common way to do this is with a configuration file. And the format I recommend for almost every situation is JSON. JSON. JavaScript Object Notation. Don't let the name scare you. A JSON file is just a structured text file. It looks like what's on the screen now if you're watching this on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Spotify. Inside curly braces are key value pairs. A key, like color, is inside of quotation marks, followed by a colon, followed by the value, which here is a color code inside quotation marks. If we had multiple key value pairs, they would be separated by commas. That's it. A list of names with their corresponding values. Your code reads this file, and whenever it needs to know the approval threshold, it reads config.approval threshold. When that value changes in the file, the code automatically picks up the new value next time it runs. Now, a JSON is a great start, but a flat JSON file has limits. As your configuration grows, it becomes unwieldy. For anything beyond a simple single user tool, I recommend building an admin page. Think of this as the control room for your automation. It's a dedicated area of your tool, accessible only to administrators, where all the configuration lives. I like to organize the admin panel into three tabs corresponding to our three levels. Tab 1, Structure. This is where administrators manage the organizational configuration: countries and regions, departments, the people assigned to each role, their contact information, their backup contacts, any thresholds or rules that govern the workflow, approval limits, escalation timers, notification frequencies. This tab is the living org chart of your automation. Tab 2, Style. This is where administrators control the visual presentation. Primary and secondary colors entered as color codes or chosen from a color picker. Uploading of the logo stores the file, references it throughout the tool. Typography settings, layout preferences. If your tool has customizable dashboard widgets, the configuration for those lives here too. Tab 3, Text and Language. This is where all the interface labels live. Every button name, every field label, every error message, every tooltip organized in a simple table. Key, English value, German value, Spanish value, and so on. Administrators can add new languages by adding a new column. They can update any label without ever touching code. Now, connecting all of this to actual users. Every user in your system should have a profile. At minimum, that profile contains three things: their name, their email, and their preferred language. When a user logs in, the system does a quick lookup. It checks their preferred language, loads the corresponding translation set, and serves them a fully localized experience automatically. They never have to ask for it. They never even think about it. It just works. You can extend the user profile with more preferences over time: preferred color theme, notification settings, default views, but language is the most important one to get right from the beginning. I want to talk briefly about where this configuration data should actually live, because this is a question I get a lot. For simple tools, a single user automation, a personal workflow, a JSON file stored alongside your code is perfectly fine. Easy to edit, easy to read, no database required. For tools used by a team, say 5 to 50 people, I'd recommend a simple database table or a dedicated settings spreadsheet, something that's easy for a non-technical admin to update. A spreadsheet on SharePoint that can be edited by the team works surprisingly well for this, especially in organizations that already have Office 365. For larger tools, anything with dozens of users, multiple departments, complex permissions, you want a proper database with a proper admin interface. The configuration lives in the database. The admin page reads and writes to the database. Users never see the raw data. One pattern I want to highlight specifically because it's underused: layered configuration. Here's what I mean. You might have company-wide settings: the primary brand color, the company name, the default language. You might also have department-level settings. The finance department has different approval thresholds than the marketing department, and then you have user-level settings, each user's preferred language and interface preferences. When your tool loads a setting, it checks those layers in order: user preference first, then department, then company-wide default. This allows maximum flexibility with minimum complexity. A user who prefers dark mode gets dark mode, even if the company default is light mode. A department that operates in a different currency gets the right currency, even if the company default is USD. This pattern, user overrides department, department overrides company, is how most well-designed enterprise software works under the hood. And it's not hard to implement. It's just a priority lookup. Let me also address the question of security and access control, because the admin page introduces a real concern. What if someone who shouldn't be making changes gets into the admin area? The answer is role-based access control. Your user profiles include a role: regular user, department admin, or super admin. Regular users see the tool. Department admins can manage their department structure and settings. Super admins can see and change everything. This isn't complex to implement, and it's essential. You don't want your intern accidentally changing the approval threshold or wiping the translation table. All right, I want to tie this all together with one final thought on the technical side. When you build this admin area, the config files, the admin page, the user profiles, you are building what's sometimes called a 12-factor app, or a configuration-driven architecture. These are terms used by professional software engineers to describe exactly what we've been talking about: separating configuration from code. The reason professional developers have a name for this is because it matters a lot. It makes tools more maintainable, more portable, more scalable, and more durable. It's not just a nice to have, it's a best practice with decades of evidence behind it. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to call it that. You don't have to understand the entire philosophy behind it. You just have to remember one rule: if a value might change, don't put it in the code. Put it somewhere else. All right, let's bring this home. We started with Dave. Poor Dave, spending his Tuesday afternoon hunting for a name and a number baked into his code. We talked about how he had built a prison instead of a solution. And then we talked about 3 levels of customization that transform a fragile automation into a durable one. Level 1, organizational structure. Map roles, not people. Externalize thresholds and rules. Build escalation paths that reflect your org chart, not your assumptions about who will always be where. Level 2, style and branding. Embrace the bike shedding. Give people the crayons. Build a style configuration that lets non-technical users control the look and feel, colors, logos, typography, without touching your code. Turn their need for control into a feature, not a burden. Level 3, interface language. Decouple your words from your logic. Use translation tables and terminology files. Build for global teams from day one. Let users choose their preferred language and see the tool respond instantly. And then we built the technical blueprint: a spreadsheet for a small team, followed by a JSON configuration file for larger projects, a 3-tab admin panel, a user profile page with language preferences, and layered configuration so that user preferences always win. The hallmark of a great automation isn't just that it works, it's that it survives. It survives personnel changes. It survives rebrands. It survives expansion into new markets. It survives because it was built to be flexible from the start. Your challenge this week, and I want to be specific and achievable, is this: Take one automation you've built in the past. It doesn't have to be your most important one. Find one hard-coded value, one. Maybe it's an email address, maybe it's a dollar amount, maybe it's a color code, and move that value out of the code and into an external configuration file or a setting sheet. One value. That's all I'm asking. Because here's the thing about habits. The first one is the hardest. Once you've moved one value out of your code and into a config file, the next one is easier. And before long, it becomes second nature. You'll stop thinking about it as extra work. You'll see it for what it is: protection. Protection for your future self, protection for your users, protection for the tool you worked hard to build. Stop being the gatekeeper. Give your users the keys. I'm your host, Justin, and this has been Automate Office Work. If this episode was useful, please share it with one person on your team who builds things for other people. That's how this show grows, and it means more than you know. Visit our website, automateofficework.com, for all kinds of great resources. You can connect with me and see all the past episodes and the services I provide, whether you need someone to build your dream for you or to just build it with you. Feel free to reach out to me if you have ideas for future episodes, including even coming on as a guest to share your expertise or even just your experience. See you in the next episode, and until then, happy automating.